Hi, everyone. Welcome back to The Good Doctor's continuing coverage of Netflix's masterpiece, The Crown. Yes. I am Dr. Kristen.
I am Dr. Erin.
And we are here to talk about one of the low points in that masterpiece, episode 4.
Episode 4.
Of season 3. So, spoiler alert, we hated this one for a whole lot of reasons. Also, anyone joining us for the first time, a couple quick things. We don't do point-by-point recaps ever. It's just not our jam. We're more thematic people. We are also professionally scholars of Northern Ireland as an entity, as a legal and cultural entity. And for those of you who are unaware, during the time span of season 2 of The Crown, there was a lot happening in Northern Ireland.
Yep.
Politically, emotionally, exocentrically, like lots and lots happening.
Physically, like physical violence.
Yeah. There was a lot of people who lost their lives. There was a lot of people going to prison. Lots of stuff that would have been brought to the attention of a sovereign. And the show is choosing not to engage. So
or would have been discussed in cabinet meetings, which we got a cabinet meeting in this episode.
We did get a cabinet meeting in this episode. So again, also, I think by and large, one of our preoccupations with this show is the story that Peter Morgan is choosing to tell.
Yes.
So all stories are chosen, how you craft them. The story that we tell you about who we are is crafted. The story that we tell friends about who we are is crafted. So we are not saying that any story, history itself is crafted.
Yes.
So all stories are crafted. So we're not necessarily critical that he crafted it. We are critical over how he crafted
it. And I mean, that goes on several levels, right? The story he is telling, obviously, about Queen Elizabeth being primary, since this show is called The Crown, it is not called The Monarchy, it is not called The Brits, it is not called
Philip and Margaret, much to the content discussion.
It is The Crown, and we have been told through 2 seasons that really the only person wearing the crown is Queen Elizabeth. So the story he is telling about her as a person and as a monarch, tangentially her family, the story he is telling about her family, the story he is telling about the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, because that is the political entity of which she is sovereign. And the people therein, the people and lives and stories and experiences that exist therein, that was handled, if you saw our episode 3 recap, really, really well, really, really well with the Aberfan tragedy. So what story is he telling in episode 4? Bibbikins.
So a couple quick things. Fact check wise, very little of this happened the way we know it did. So, or that he says it did.
At all, yeah.
Yeah. So for instance, the journalist that we meet, who's played by Colin Morgan, who ironically is from Banbridge, County Down, Northern Ireland.
I was so happy to hear his accent, which literally few people outside of Northern Ireland are going to know is a Northern Irish accent, but I was delighted.
I loved it. And he's from a part of the country where I lived for a little bit. So like we actually have a couple mutual friends. And he's a lovely young man from what I hear. And he is most famous for his portrayal of Merlin on the BBC series several years ago.
And I also forgot, he was on a whole season of The Fall, which if anybody's watched that on Netflix.
Oh, I forgot he was. That's right.
Yeah, he was the detective that Gillian Anderson's character slept with that got killed. Sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't watched The Fall. But yeah, I forgot he was in that and I was like, oh, bless.
So he does not exist. A journalist named Jack Anderson did not exist.
But close.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Also,
the Guardian newspaper definitely does.
Yes.
Philip, I don't know about Meet the Press. I forgot to Google that.
Oh, me too.
Philip does invite a news crew in. That is true.
Yes. They were having a debate nationally about the cost of the crown. I do believe that was true. And they're still having that debate. Yeah, they do that from time to time, especially during economic downturns. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's an interesting dichotomy of Philip, because I don't disbelieve that he's a Muppet enough to think that he deserves a yacht, because we've been presented like a very entitled Philip. but it's weird dichotomy with the Philip of last episode and a couple episodes ago where he was like the voice of reason, and now he's back to season 2 Philip.
Yeah,
it's a little bit weird.
Yeah, where I think he can be super pragmatic. He's super realistic. He's the one we're led to believe in season 1 that pushed to have the coronation televised because he understood that the power of the television medium and the need for people to feel invested in her coronation. And so there's that Philip. Also the spoiled Philip. He can be multiple things, I guess, at the same time, but to have them in the same episode where he's like, well, you're taking away my yacht and I can't play polo anymore. And then to turn around and be like, I know the way to fix this. Let's do a documentary. Like it was
was very well received and actually aired multiple times after this.
Yeah, I think it is true that the Queen didn't like it.
I think that's definitely true. My in-laws remember watching it. So
he did not ban it from television ever again. No. It aired, so this was 1967. It aired again, I think, in 69, 71, and 77, and has not been aired since, but it aired multiple times.
Yeah. And it definitely, like, you can access it on the BBC's archive website. It's not buried.
Yeah, it's not in a vault in Buckingham Palace where no one can see it. No,
because I accessed it through the British Library at one point for my PhD. Like I got clips of it. So, okay.
Yeah. So the episode as a whole.
So I don't understand what he's trying to tell us about Philip and his mother. Oh my gosh. Also, Princess Alice. Let's talk about Princess Alice.
Yeah. So a huge part of this episode is that there is a military coup in Athens where we find out Philip's mother has been running a convent for whoever knows how long. And they decide, well, she is, the mother to the prince. She needs to maybe get out of there because she's not safe. And, Philip doesn't want her to come to Buckingham Palace because it's going to get in the way of the documentary. And Elizabeth is just like, no, bring her. And we learn a lot of things about Princess Alice that I think are accurate.
I'm looking up right now, but I believe, I'm just double checking some things. I'm on the old Tinternet.
This is something they've talked about multiple times. Her being in and out of psychiatric institutions.
Yeah. So she was absolutely never interviewed.
Yes, she was never interviewed when she was in England, or I think ever.
Yeah. So there was so I'm reading right now from a Town and Country article. And it says there was a BBC documentary made about the royal family, but it did not get a damning review in The Guardian.
Right.
A TV critic noted that Queen Elizabeth was a delightful surprise. And Princess Alice was not praised. She was forgotten. By the end of her life, in her official biography, it says, by the end of her life, the general public scarcely remembered that she was alive. She died in 1969.
So she died 2 years after this episode is set. So I don't know what story is Peter Morgan telling? This documentary was well received by the press. Yes, yep. There were critiques of how the crown was spending the taxpayers' money. There always has been. So you could have just had that debate without Joe Armstrong's character.
Yep.
Writing a horrible article and,
Now, do I believe if something was like that, the Guardian newsroom would stand up and applaud it? I do. Yeah, I do. Because the Guardian is a fairly neutral to anti-monarchist piece of paper.
Yeah.
And
there were, this was the time of a socialist leaning labor government. You wouldn't think about 1967 in global politics. There was a lot of protest movements and civil rights movements and revolutions and street protests happening. So we're coming into 1968. So I believe there was some, societal discontent over the state of the monarchy. But a whole episode about that and Philip's relationship with his mom.
And his daughter. It just didn't seem, yeah. And then there's the irony of casting a Northern Irish actor and letting him use his Northern Irish accent to be a radical journalist for a paper for pretty much the only British newspaper that covered Northern Ireland in a show that is not talking about Northern Ireland. So it was just like, you and I talked about this offline. The minute he opened his mouth on that phone call, I just started laughing.
Yeah. And like, we talked about this also offline, right? There are no one outside of Northern Ireland or people who know and love Northern Ireland are going to recognize that for a Northern Irish accent. The article you found that says that Joe Armstrong is a fictional character says that he was also an Irish journalist.
Yeah.
Which is Northern Ireland is different than Ireland. Certainly would have had a very different accent. So I recognize that, like, I am in the minority of people that would even recognize that. But for me and my friends and my loved ones in Northern Ireland that are following the show and following the fact that it is not talking about Northern Ireland at all, to hire one of the few working and well-known Northern Irish actors in British television. Like, there's only a handful outside, like, that have done as much work as Colin Morgan. But to hire him, to have him have his actual accent, because a lot of times they just make people have, like, British accents, and to tell me that he is a journalist for The Guardian in 1967 and his biggest concern is the public perception of the monarchy.
It just felt like another...
Not the
Peter
fact
Morgan didn't think things through.
Not the fact that his province is on the brink of significant turmoil.
And we should say, too, that we have some Northern Irish friends. I specifically have Northern Irish friends who are perfectly comfortable with the fact that the Crown is not addressing Northern Ireland at all.
Sure, I'm sure there are a lot of people in Northern Ireland that couldn't care.
Yeah, and so just so you guys are aware, we are not, like, our anger is our anger alone.
Yes, we are not claiming to speak for
anybody.
Everyone, a lot of people.
And I completely understand my friends who are like, no, I don't want them to talk about it at all because they'll probably screw it up because everybody does.
Right.
I totally respect that. The irony of casting Colin Morgan is just, who did a great job. And I wish he was a character that was sticking around.
Colin Morgan,
it was just too rich. The irony was too rich.
Yeah, so that's a side rant that's not, as important as some of our other rants. But yeah, for me, it was just like one more blow. I was like, oh, cool.
I had to pause it because I was laughing so hard.
And then I was so excited. I was like, give him more speaking because I love that accent.
Because I want to hear him speak. Yeah, I know. It sounds like home. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, this episode ends with a revelatory conversation between the Prime Minister and the Sovereign.
Yep.
Which is interesting, to use a word that you use a lot, dramaturgical, like, mechanism.
Yep. It's like the voice of the people.
Yeah. And it was so interesting for him to say to her, that they don't want you to be an ideal person. They don't want you to be human. Which I think is and isn't true. Like, they want humanity from their sovereign, but they also recognize, I think, a lot of people that she is something other.
Yeah.
And she references, like, there was the episode title, I looked it up offline, of her coronation episode was Smoke and Mirrors. So
I remember that. Yep.
She references that again in this conversation, and she says, there has to be the ritual and mystery. There has to be the smoke and mirrors. They are there to keep us alive. So, like, without those, then there's no need for the monarchy, really. Which is it's a very, very a very complicated issue to give 5 minutes to give Olivia Colman 5 minutes to deal with at the end of an episode that was almostly about Philip.
Yeah. And I wish, like, there's so many little things like that I wish they would have unpacked. Like, I don't believe that Princess Alice, who went through rounds and rounds of electroshock therapy, would have, which we know is now classified essentially as a torture device, would have been able to be that cognizant on the level that she was. And if that's historically true, I would have liked that addressed.
But we don't know that because she never gave an interview.
So there is an official biography of her. So now, and a 2012 documentary, evidently. So I'm going to dig those up and see. Okay. And so look for maybe an amended show note in a little bit, guys. But what I do know from my like social work and psych training is that very few folks functioned independently after multiple rounds of electroshock therapy.
Electroshock therapy, yeah. So for me, it was really interesting to heroicize her rightly for what she suffered, and we know a lot about how historically women have been treated by medical professionals, particularly non-conforming women. Gender.
Yeah. So did she have schizophrenia? Maybe not. Like, I mean, we diagnosed for decades PMS as hysteria. So
and this concept of hysteria and this lack of medical knowledge or understanding about female biology and physiology and hormones, all of that we know to be true, and we know women were like incarcerated by their brothers and husbands for not behaving as women were supposed to behave. And sometimes that meant they liked to wear pants. Like it didn't mean that they had a significant mental health issue. So all of this I believe, and I think it's wonderful that they decided to tell this story if it is true about Princess Alice, but I also didn't think she was going to be that articulate. I could be wrong.
It was one of those that felt brushed over and or rushed. Like if we want to spend an hour with Princess Alice, she sounds fascinating enough that I would love to spend an hour with Princess Alice.
Yeah.
But then let me spend an hour with Princess Alice, not the created Princess Alice you're giving us, I guess is my...
Yeah. Yeah.
So which is hard because then, I mean, I understand my desire for him to stick to the historical record, again, which is what I said in Aberfan, is because it allows him to play as the showrunner, and it allows the actors to play more with the emotions.
Yeah.
That I find the most fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'm not here, like I joke that we're here for the brooches, and like certainly her dress in this episode with the gorgeous, with the sash and her tiara, and when they're fighting about his mother, gorgeous.
Loved it.
I am primarily here for the emotional the emotional disclosures.
Right.
And so for me, this kind of episode is frustrating because it's like, well, that's not an emotional
disclosure.
Disclosure.
Yeah, and what was really interesting to me, speaking of emotional disclosures, was, I didn't feel super satisfied by the reconciliation with Philip and Princess Alice at the end. It was a nice moment, but I didn't feel like it was really important to happen in this show.
Nope.
And then the scene of them like walking into the garden, and Elizabeth, I was watching it with my mom, and like at the end, like we can't tell if she smiles. And then she sits down, turns around, sits down, facing away from the window, and she does not look happy. And I was like, what story are you telling? She maybe smiled a little bit like, oh, Philip and Alice. But it wasn't a display of like, and then she sat down and she looked unhappy. I was like,
I was like, you wanted this? I don't understand.
Don't want this? What story are we telling with your face, Olivia Colman? Yeah, it was a really confusing end to the episode for me. Just that like 15 seconds of her face. I was like, what? Whoa, are you unhappy about this? Or why? I don't. And then like end scene, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
it was weird.
Yeah, weird is my summary of the whole episode, and I think that's all the rants I have for it. Anything else from you?
No, I don't think so. Nothing. I don't remember if we said what was happening in Northern Ireland in 1967.
Oh no, we forgot.
Not too much. The civil rights movement is growing significantly, and we have in January, February 1967, the formation of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, which then, as an organization, moved towards planning and organizing and executing civil rights marches that would start to take place across the province in 1967. and would eventually lead to violent clashes in 1968 with police and eventually the British Army. So not really big events. Those are coming, we promise, and we'll talk about them. But things are, again, moving towards, for lack of a better word, an explosion of violence.
And on that note.
Yes, so with that fortune-telling end note, where you're looking forward to a lot more joy from us in the coming episodes.
We'll see you for episode 5.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.